"This isn't a place for people like you," sneered the wealthy patron, his voice dripping with disdain as the elegant restaurant's chandeliers cast a mocking glow. A humble black woman, an acclaimed educator and philanthropist, stood at the hostess stand, her simple dress drawing scorn from the receptionist, manager, and this arrogant guest. Mocked for her appearance, interrupted when she tried to explain, and humiliated as diners watched with amusement, she faced blatant racism and classism, her dignity tested by their cruel assumptions. Then her millionaire husband, a key business partner of the restaurant, arrived, his presence shifting the air. What happens when prejudice collides with truth? Will justice prevail, or will appearances win? Stick around to uncover a story that challenges what worth truly means. Subscribe now for our latest stories and share where you're listening from. Your voice matters. Can she turn this injustice into a moment of change? The golden hour bathed Chicago's Gold Coast in a warm, amber glow, its streets alive with the hum of evening traffic and the clink of wine glasses from rooftop bars. Crystal Lopez moved through the bustling sidewalks with a quiet grace, her navy cotton dress swaying gently against her knees. At 36, she carried the poise of someone who had spent years shaping young minds, her hands still dusted with faint traces of acrylic paint from an after-school art class. Her worn flats tapped softly against the pavement, a practical choice for a woman who valued purpose over pretense. Tonight, though, her heart thrummed with a special mission, to surprise her husband, Bruce Adams, with a reservation at L'Étoile, the city's crown jewel of fine dining, for their 10th anniversary. Crystal's mind drifted to a decade ago, when she and Bruce were just dreamers in love. She was a literacy teacher, pouring her soul into helping children in Chicago's underserved neighborhoods find their voices through words. Bruce, then a scrappy real estate developer with a vision for sustainable urban spaces, had charmed her with his relentless optimism. Their first date at L'Étoile had been a leap of faith, two 20-somethings splurging on a single extravagant meal, laughing over shared plates in a restaurant that felt like a world apart from their modest lives. Now, with Bruce's real estate empire thriving and Crystal's Lopez education fund transforming thousands of lives, she wanted to revisit that memory, to celebrate their journey with a nostalgic dinner. The grand facade of L'Étoile loomed. Ahead, its marble columns and floor-to-ceiling windows exuding an air of untouchable elegance. Crystal paused, smoothing her dress, her fingers brushing the faint paint stains that clung stubbornly to her cuticles. She hadn't planned to dress up. Her art program had run late, and this was only a quick stop to secure the reservation. For next week, her watch read 6:30 p.m., perfect timing. The reservation was a surprise, a gesture to honor Bruce's tireless work on his latest eco-friendly housing project. Crystal smiled to herself, imagining his face when she revealed the plan. Pushing open the heavy glass door, she stepped into a world of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in pristine white linen, where Chicago's elite sipped martinis and murmured over candle-lit dinners. The air carried the delicate scent of truffle oil and fresh orchids, and soft, classical music wove through the hum of conversation. Crystal's heart quickened, not from intimidation but from the thrill of reclaiming a piece of their past. She approached the hostess stand, where a young woman in a sleek black blazer stood, her name tag reading Sophia. Crystal offered a warm smile, her voice steady. "Good evening, I'd like to make a reservation for next Friday for 2. Sophia's eyes flicked over Crystal, lingering on her simple dress and paint-flecked hands. Her practiced smile tightened, a subtle shift that Crystal caught but chose to ignore. "I'm afraid we're booked solid for months," Sophia replied, her tone clipped, as if the matter were already settled. Crystal nodded, undeterred, her educator's patience kicking. "I understand it's a busy place," she said, her voice calm but earnest. "It's for our 10th anniversary, and this restaurant means a lot to my husband and me. Could I possibly speak with someone about any openings?" Before Sophia could respond, a man in a tailored pinstripe suit approached, his presence commanding. The hostess's attention. Crystal recognized him vaguely, Richard Foster, a venture capitalist whose face often graced Chicago's society pages. His voice carried a sharp edge as he leaned toward Sophia, ignoring Crystal entirely. "Sophia, my table's not ready, and I specifically requested the 95 Chateau Margaux. This is unacceptable." Sophia's demeanor shifted instantly, her smile warming as she assured him, "Right away, Mr. Foster." Foster's gaze finally landed on Crystal, his eyes narrowing as he took in her modest attire. He leaned closer to Sophia, his voice a stage whisper meant to be overheard. "Since when do you let just anyone walk in here?" The words stung, sharp and deliberate. But Crystal held her ground, her jaw tightening only slightly. She was no stranger to judgment. Years of navigating spaces where her blackness and humility were scrutinized had taught her resilience. Still, the blatant disdain in Foster's tone sparked a flicker of indignation. "Sir," Crystal said, turning to Foster with a measured tone, "I'm only here to make a reservation, not to dine tonight." Her words were polite but firm, a teacher's clarity cutting through his arrogance. Foster snorted, his lips curling into a smirk. "This isn't a community center, sweetheart. People dress for places like this." Sophia cleared her throat, her discomfort evident but overshadowed by her deference to Foster. "As I said, madam, we're fully booked," she reiterated, her voice now tinged with dismissal. "Perhaps one of the bistros down the street would suit you better." Crystal felt a flush creep up her neck, not from embarrassment but from the injustice of being reduced to her appearance. She straightened, her eyes locking onto Sophia's. "This place is special to us," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'd be happy to place a deposit if that helps secure a table." Foster's smirk widened, and he muttered loud enough for nearby diners to hear, "Some people don't know their place." A few patrons glanced over, their expressions a mix of curiosity and amusement, as the air grew heavy with unspoken judgment. Crystal's heart sank, not for herself, but for the ease with which they dismissed her. She was no stranger to the weight of prejudice. Her work with the Lopez Education Fund had shown her how quickly society judged those who didn't fit its mold. Yet standing here, in a place tied to such a cherished memory, the sting felt sharper. She opened her mouth to try again, to explain the significance of the anniversary, but Sophia's hand rose, cutting her off. "Madam, I've been clear. We cater to a specific clientele." The implication hung in the air, as sharp as Foster's earlier barb. Crystal's fingers tightened around her purse, her resolve tested but unbroken. She wasn't here to prove herself to them. She was here for Bruce, for their love, for a moment that transcended this room's shallow standards. But as she prepared to respond, the weight of their gazes pressed harder, and she sensed the situation slipping beyond reason. Outside, the Chicago evening waited, cool and indifferent, while inside, the first sparks of a confrontation were igniting, a confrontation that would soon reveal the true cost of prejudice. The air inside L'Etoile thickened, heavy with the clink of silverware and the weight of judgmental eyes. Crystal Lopez stood at the hostess stand, her navy dress a stark contrast to the glittering opulence around her. The faint paint stains on her hands, remnants of her after-school art class, seemed to burn under the scrutiny of the restaurant's elite patrons. She squared her shoulders, her educator's resolve anchoring her against the rising tide of disdain. Crystal's voice remained steady, her words measured. "I'm only asking for a reservation," she said, addressing Sophia, the hostess, whose practiced smile had hardened into a mask of dismissal. "This is for a special occasion, our anniversary. Surely there's a way to make this work." Sophia's eyes flicked toward Richard Foster, the venture capitalist lounging nearby, his tailored suit exuding entitlement. His earlier barb, "Some people don't know their place," still echoed in Crystal's mind, but she pressed on, her tone calm yet insistent. "I'm happy to speak with a manager or place a deposit," she offered, her fingers brushing the strap of her modest purse. Sophia's response was swift, her voice laced with condescension. "Madam, as I've said, we're fully booked. Our clientele expects a certain ambiance. The word hung in the air, sharp and coated, a thinly veiled jab at Crystal's appearance. Foster leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening as he sipped his wine. "This isn't a soup kitchen," he called out, his voice carrying across the dining room, drawing chuckles from a nearby table. Crystal's chest tightened, not from shame but from the raw injustice of being judged for her blackness and simplicity. She was no stranger to such prejudice. Years of advocating for underserved youth had taught her to navigate these slights. But the public nature of this humiliation stung. Diners began to turn, their gazes a mix of curiosity and amusement, as if Crystal were an unwelcome sideshow in their evening of indulgence. Before Crystal could respond, a woman in a crisp blazer approached, her heels clicking with authority. The name tag read Evelyn, manager. Her eyes swept over Crystal, lingering on her worn flats and paint-flecked hands, her expression one of calculated judgment. "Is there an issue, Sophia?" Evelyn asked, her tone sharp enough to slice through. The room's murmurs. Sophia gestured toward Crystal, her voice smooth but cold. "This woman was just leaving. She's been informed we have no availability." Crystal's heart sank, but her resolve held firm. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm trying to book a table for my husband and me for our anniversary. How is that disturbing anyone?" Evelyn's lips pursed, her gaze flicking to Foster, who raised an eyebrow in silent encouragement. "Madam," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you're causing a disturbance. Our guests expect a refined environment, and we must maintain that standard." The word standard landed like a slap, its implications clear. Crystal's fingers tightened around her purse, her educator's patience tested by the overt racism and classism. "Your standards seem to be based on appearance, not character," she said, her tone steady, but laced with quiet defiance. Foster snorted from his table, his voice carrying again. "Some people need to be told twice. This place isn't for everyone." A few diners laughed, emboldening Evelyn, who stepped closer, her voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "Madam, I must ask you to leave now, or I'll have you escorted out." Crystal's pulse quickened, disbelief mingling with indignation. "You're throwing me out for trying to make a reservation?" she asked, her eyes locking onto Evelyn's. The manager's expression hardened. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't meet our expectations." The room grew quieter, the clatter of forks pausing as more patrons turned to watch, some with thinly veiled amusement, others with unease. Crystal tried once more, her voice firm but calm. "My husband is—" Evelyn cut her off, her smirk mirroring Foster's. "Oh, let me guess, someone very important? We hear that all the time." Crystal's breath caught, the dismissal cutting deeper than the earlier slights. She was a founder of the Lopez Education Fund, a mentor to thousands, yet here, reduced to nothing by their assumptions. Before she could respond, Evelyn signaled to a security guard, Marcus, who approached hesitantly, his broad shoulders tense. "Ma'am, please," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic, as he gestured toward the exit. Crystal stood her ground, her dignity a quiet force in the face of their scorn. "This isn't right," she said, her gaze sweeping from Evelyn to Sophia to Foster. "You're judging me without knowing me." Foster's laughter rang out again, sharp and cruel. "Finally," he called, "get her out of here. This isn't a charity kitchen." The words echoed as Marcus gently but firmly guided Crystal toward the glass doors, his eyes downcast, clearly uncomfortable with his role. As Crystal stepped toward the exit, the cool Chicago evening waiting beyond, her heart ached, not for herself but for the countless others who had faced this same prejudice in spaces meant to exclude. The weight of their gazes followed her, a mix of smug satisfaction and detached curiosity. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, intending to call Bruce. Unbeknownst to her, the low hum of a Bentley's engine was already approaching, its silver frame gleaming under the streetlights. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would challenge the very foundations of L'Etoile's so-called standards. The Chicago evening wrapped Crystal Lopez in a cool embrace. As she stepped onto the sidewalk outside L'Etoile, the restaurant's golden glow mocking her from behind the glass doors. Her navy dress fluttered lightly in the breeze, the faint paint stains on her hands a quiet testament to her day spent nurturing young artists. The sting of humiliation lingered, not from the rejection itself, but from the brazen prejudice that had cast her out. Crystal's fingers hovered over her phone, poised to call her husband Bruce, her heart heavy with the need to share this injustice. Before she could dial, the sleek purr of a finely tuned engine cut through the city's hum. A silver Bentley glided to a stop at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the streetlights like a mirror. Crystal's breath caught. She knew that car and the man inside it better than anyone. Bruce Adams, 42, stepped out, his charcoal suit tailored to his tall frame, exuding an authority that needed no fanfare. He had finished a meeting early, his mind on surprising Crystal, after she'd mentioned stopping by L'Etoile to plan their anniversary. His dark eyes scanned the sidewalk, landing on her standing alone, her posture a mix of resilience and quiet hurt. Confusion flickered across his face, swiftly replaced by a steely focus as he pieced together the scene. He crossed the pavement in long strides, his presence a force that seemed to shift the very air. Pushing open L'Etoile's heavy glass door, he entered the dining room, where the clatter of cutlery and murmured conversations faltered at his arrival. Sophia, the hostess, snapped to attention, her earlier condescension vanishing as she registered Bruce's understated wealth. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice now dripping with deference. "Welcome to L'Etoile. Do you have a reservation?" Bruce's gaze was unyielding, his tone calm but edged with steel. "I'm here to meet my wife," he said, pausing. For effect. "Crystal Lopez." The name landed like a stone in still water, rippling through Sophia's composure. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting nervously toward the door where Crystal stood just beyond. "Mr. Adams?" she ventured, the weight of his name a cornerstone in Chicago's real estate world, dawning on her. Inside, the dining room's opulence felt suffocating, its chandeliers casting a harsh light on the scene unfolding. Richard Foster, the EU venture capitalist, lounged at his table, oblivious to the shift, his wine glass tilted lazily as he regaled his companions. Crystal stepped back inside, her hand finding Bruce's, her presence a quiet anchor amidst the growing tension. The diners, murmurs faded, their attention drawn to the tableau at the entrance. Bruce's eyes locked onto Sophia, his voice measured but piercing. "It seems my wife was asked to leave your establishment. Care to explain why?" Sophia's face paled, her hands fumbling with the reservation book. "Sir, there must be some misunderstanding," she stammered, her earlier confidence crumbling. Evelyn, the manager, hurried over, her heels clicking with urgency. Her eyes flicked between Bruce's impeccable suit and Crystal's modest attire, her mind racing to salvage the situation. "Mr. Adams, we're so sorry for any confusion," she said, her tone forced and overly polite. "We have certain standards to maintain and—" Bruce cut her off, his voice low but commanding. "Standards that involve humiliating my wife. For trying to book a table?" Crystal stood beside him, her heart swelling with both gratitude and resolve. She squeezed his hand gently, her educator's instinct urging calm, but Bruce's righteous indignation was a fire she rarely saw. From his table, Foster's voice broke through, brash and unapologetic. "What's this about, another charity case causing a scene?" His companions chuckled, but the laughter died as Bruce turned, his gaze pinning Foster like a spotlight. "And you are?" Bruce asked, his tone deceptively conversational. "Richard Foster," the man replied, puffing out his chest. "A regular here. I expect a certain environment, and frankly, some people don't fit it." The room grew deathly quiet, forks hovering mid-air as diners sensed the brewing storm. Crystal's chest tightened, the memory of Foster's earlier taunts, "This isn't a soup kitchen," echoing in her mind. She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I was only trying to make a reservation for our anniversary," she said, her words clear and deliberate. "I didn't realize that required fitting your mold." Bruce's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving Foster. "My wife," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent restaurant, "is Crystal Lopez, founder of the Lopez Education Fund, mentoring thousands of children. She serves on the Chicago Arts Council, shaping this city's cultural heart. And you dismissed her because of her dress?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswerable. Sophia stood frozen, her reservation book forgotten, while Evelyn's professional mask slipped, her eyes darting nervously to Foster for support. Foster shifted uncomfortably, his bravado wavering under Bruce's unflinching stare. "It's about maintaining a standard," he muttered. But the words lacked conviction. Crystal felt the weight of the room's attention, not as judgment, now, but as a collective holding of breath. She wasn't here for spectacle. Her heart yearned for the simple joy of planning their anniversary. But the injustice demanded a response. Bruce's presence, steady and unyielding, was a shield. But it was her strength that kept her standing tall. Evelyn tried again, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Adams, perhaps we could discuss this privately. We'd be honored to accommodate you and your wife." Bruce's expression didn't soften. "This isn't about accommodation," he said, his voice a quiet thunder. "It's about respect, or the lack of it." The dining room remained suspended in tension, every eye fixed on the couple at the center. Crystal's hand tightened in Bruce's, her resolve mirroring his. Something bigger was unfolding, a moment that would ripple beyond these walls. The dining room of L'Etoile stood frozen, its opulent chandeliers casting a brittle light over the scene. Crystal Lopez, her navy dress unyielding against the tide of judgment, stood hand in hand with her husband Bruce Adams, whose presence seemed to command the very air. The silence was a living thing, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths as patrons held their breath, their forks suspended over half-eaten plates. Crystal's heart pounded, not from fear but from the clarity of the moment, an injustice laid bare, demanding reckoning. Bruce's voice, calm yet razor-sharp, still echoed, "This isn't about accommodation. It's about respect, or the lack of it." His words hung like a challenge, daring the room to confront its complicity. Crystal's gaze met that of Evelyn, the manager, whose polished facade cracked under the scrutiny. "Mr. Adams," Evelyn ventured, her voice strained. "With forced civility, surely we can resolve this privately. We'd be honored to seat you and your wife immediately." Her eyes flicked nervously to Crystal, as if recalculating her worth now that Bruce's status was clear. Crystal felt a flicker of indignation. This offer wasn't atonement. It was a desperate attempt to save face. She squeezed Bruce's hand, her educator's instinct urging restraint, but his resolve was a fire that wouldn't be doused. Bruce turned his attention to Richard Foster, the venture capitalist whose smugness had fueled the earlier humiliation. Foster shifted in his seat, his earlier bravado wilting under Bruce's unrelenting stare. "You," Bruce said, his tone deceptively even, "felt it necessary to mock my wife for her appearance. Tell me, what makes someone worthy of respect? In your eyes?" The question sliced through the room, simple yet devastating. Foster blinked, caught off guard, his wineglass forgotten in his hand. "Standards must be maintained," he stammered, his voice lacking its earlier bite. "This is a place for a certain caliber of person." Crystal's chest tightened, the sting of Foster's words reigniting the memory of her public dismissal. She stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "I came to plan a celebration of love," she said, addressing the room as much as Foster. "I mentor children, build communities, yet you judged me by my dress and skin. What does that say about your caliber?" The dining room was a sea of averted eyes and uncomfortable shifts, the truth of her words settling like dust after a storm. Marcus, the security guard who had reluctantly escorted Crystal out, stepped forward, his broad frame tense with resolve. She tried to explain, he said, his voice low but firm, surprising even himself. She mentioned her anniversary, her husband, but no one listened. His eyes met Crystal's, a quiet apology in them, before he turned to Evelyn. I can't be part of this anymore. With deliberate care, he unclipped his security badge and placed it on the hostess stand, the soft clink echoing in the silent room. Sophia, the hostess, flinched, her reservation book trembling in her hands. From a corner table, an elderly couple rose, their presence commanding despite their understated elegance. The woman, her silver hair swept into an elegant bun, addressed the room with a voice that carried decades of authority. We've dined here for 20 years, she said, her gaze sweeping from Evelyn to Foster. But this obsession with appearances has poisoned what this place once was. We're done. Her husband nodded, his expression resolute. No more, he added, guiding her toward the exit. Murmurs rippled through the diners, a few nodding in quiet agreement, others staring at their plates, unwilling to meet the moment. Crystal watched the cascade of consequences unfold, her heart torn between sorrow and hope. She hadn't sought this confrontation. Her only goal had been a simple reservation, but the raw prejudice she'd faced demanded accountability. Bruce's voice broke through again, directed at Foster. My wife's work changes lives, he said, his tone unwavering. She builds futures for kids who have nothing. What do you build besides barriers? Foster's face reddened, his confidence crumbling as the room's attention turned against him. Crystal touched Bruce's arm, her voice soft but firm. Bruce, let's go, she said, her compassion cutting through the tension. This isn't who we are. Her words were a lifeline, grounding them both in the values they held dear. Bruce nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at her, but his final words to Evelyn were resolute. You've lost more than our business tonight, he said. You've shown who you value and who you don't. The couple turned toward the exit, Crystal's hand still in his, their unity a quiet rebuke to the room's earlier scorn. As they reached the glass doors, the weight of the confrontation lingered, a spark that promised to ignite change. The diners watched, some with newfound respect, others with unease as Crystal and Bruce stepped into the Chicago night. Behind them, L'Etoile's facade of elegance stood exposed, its flaws laid bare for all to see. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Crystal Lopez's community center office, casting golden patterns across the walls, adorned with vibrant children's artwork. Seated at a worn wooden desk, Crystal sorted through sketches of bright flowers and bold cityscapes, each a testament to the young minds she nurtured. Her navy dress had been replaced by a simple sweater and jeans, but the faint smudge of paint on her wrist remained, a quiet badge of her dedication. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation at L'Etoile, yet the echoes of that evening lingered in her thoughts, not as bitterness, but as a spark for change. Crystal's heart, ever tuned to possibility, saw potential where others might see only pain. Outside, Chicago buzzed with its usual rhythm, but the city's pulse carried a new undercurrent. A Chicago Tribune article, published days after the incident, had ignited a firestorm of discussion. Without naming Crystal, per her request, it detailed L'Etoile's discriminatory practices, quoting anonymous witnesses who described the public shaming of a black woman for her modest attire. The piece struck a nerve, prompting readers to share their own stories of exclusion in op-ed letters and online forums. Crystal read each one, her educator's empathy stirred by the shared experiences of those judged by appearance or race. She wasn't alone, and that truth, though heavy, fueled her resolve. At her desk, Crystal opened a letter, its handwriting neat but hesitant. It was from Sophia, the former L'Etoile hostess, whose polished demeanor had crumbled under the weight of that night's truth. I was wrong, the letter began, not just for how I treated you, but for the assumptions I've carried too long. I'm learning to do better. Sophia had left L'Etoile, and her note ended with a request to volunteer at Crystal's community center. Crystal's lips curved into a soft smile. Redemption, she knew, began with such steps. She penned a reply inviting Sophia to join an upcoming art workshop, her compassion a bridge across the divide of that painful evening. The door creaked open, and Marcus, the former security guard, stepped inside, his broad frame now clad in a casual polo shirt. After quitting L'Etoile, he'd found work at Unity Kitchen, a pay-what-you-can restaurant that welcomed all. "Mrs. Lopez," he said, his voice warm with purpose, "I wanted to thank you again. That night, it changed how I see things." Crystal set down her pen, her eyes meeting his. "You stood up too, Marcus," she said. "That took courage." He shifted, a shy grin breaking through. "I'm learning from you, seeing people for who they are, not what they look like." Marcus shared how Unity Kitchen had become his new home, its communal tables a stark contrast to L'Etoile's exclusivity. Crystal listened, her heart swelling at his enthusiasm. She'd chosen Unity Kitchen for her and Bruce's anniversary dinner, drawn to its mission of fostering community. The memory of that evening, just days ago, flickered in her mind. The restaurant's warm, rustic interior had buzzed with life, families laughing, strangers sharing stories over hearty plates of food. Crystal and Bruce had sat among them, their table a tapestry of diverse voices, a single mother celebrating her son's birthday, an elderly man recounting tales of old Chicago. The absence of judgment had felt like a balm, healing the wounds of L'Etoile's scorn. Bruce, ever understated in his generosity, had quietly arranged to cover every meal that night, his donation a silent affirmation of Unity Kitchen's values. Crystal hadn't wanted fanfare, she never did, but the gesture had deepened the evening's joy. The restaurant's founder, a former chef who'd left fine dining to build this inclusive space, had joined them briefly, sharing his vision of food as a unifier. Crystal's eyes had shone with recognition. This was the world she and Bruce fought for, one where worth was measured by heart, not status. Back in her office, Crystal's thoughts returned to the broader impact of that night at L'Etoile. Evelyn, the manager, had resigned. Her departure was part of the restaurant's public commitment to reform. A new training program, announced in a press release, promised to address bias and prioritize inclusivity. Crystal didn't revel in these changes. She wasn't one for vengeance. But she saw their necessity. The Tribune article had quoted an unnamed diner, likely the elderly woman who'd walked out, saying, "A restaurant's soul lies in its hospitality, not its gatekeeping." Crystal clipped the quote, pinning it to her bulletin board as a reminder of what was possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. "Board meeting went well. Your mentorship program expansion is fully funded." Crystal smiled, her fingers tracing the edge of a child's drawing. Marcus, inspired by their encounter, had submitted a proposal to the Lopez Education Fund, outlining a plan to bring art and literacy workshops to more underserved neighborhoods. Crystal had guided him, her expertise shaping his vision into something tangible. The approval was a victory, not just for Marcus, but for the countless children who'd find expression through his work. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across her office, Crystal stood, stretching her arms. The weight of L'Etoile's prejudice hadn't broken her. It had sparked a movement. She thought of Sophia, learning to unlearn her biases, and Marcus, building a new path at Unity Kitchen. She thought of the city, grappling with its reflection in the mirror of that night. Crystal's mission had begun with a simple reservation, but it had grown into something far greater. A call to see beyond surfaces, to value the human spirit. Stepping to the window, Crystal looked out at the Chicago skyline, its lights beginning to twinkle against the dusk. The city was changing, one heart at a time, and she was part of that quiet revolution. Her anniversary with Bruce was tomorrow, and Unity Kitchen awaited, a place where love and community would weave the next chapter of their story. The Chicago night unfurled like a velvet curtain, stars piercing the sky above Unity Kitchen, a modest brick building nestled in a vibrant, unpretentious corner of the city. Crystal Lopez stood outside, her breath visible in the crisp May air. Her simple cream blouse and jeans a quiet rebellion against the glittering exclusivity of places like L'Etoile. Tonight, on the eve of her 10th anniversary with Bruce Adams. She felt a lightness that transcended the wounds of weeks past. Her heart, ever attuned to connection, thrummed with anticipation as she glanced at Bruce, his warm smile grounding her. Unity Kitchen's sign glowed softly, promising a celebration rooted in community, not judgment. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with life, its wooden tables crowded with a tapestry of Chicago's soul, families, lone diners, and workers sharing stories over steaming plates. Crystal and Bruce stepped through the door, greeted by the scent of fresh-baked bread and rosemary. A young server, her apron dusted with flour, waved them to a long communal table where a family laughed over a child's birthday cake and an elderly man savored a bowl of soup, his eyes crinkling with quiet contentment. Crystal's spirit lifted. This was a place where no one glanced twice at her lack of designer labels or questioned her presence. They settled into their seats, the table alive with chatter. Crystal's eyes met those of a young mother across from her, whose son, no older than 6, proudly showed off a crayon drawing. "That's beautiful," Crystal said, her educator's warmth drawing a shy grin from the boy. Bruce leaned in, his voice low and playful. "You've got competition, Crystal. That kid's got an eye for color." She laughed, the sound mingling with the room's joyful hum, a stark contrast to the cold silence of L'Etoile. The menu, simple yet soulful, offered dishes crafted with care: roasted vegetables, herb-crusted chicken, and a chocolate tart that promised indulgence without pretense. Midway through their meal, the restaurant's founder, Elena, approached, her apron tied loosely over a faded denim shirt. A former Michelin-starred chef, she'd traded fine dining's rigidity for this haven of inclusivity. "Welcome," Elena said, her voice rich with sincerity. "I hear you're celebrating something special." Crystal nodded, her fingers brushing Bruce's. "Our 10th anniversary," she said, her smile radiant. "This place feels like the perfect way to mark it." Elena's eyes softened. "We're about bringing people together. Food's just the start." She shared Unity Kitchen's mission: cooking classes for kids, job training for those rebuilding their lives. And Crystal felt a kinship, her work with youth echoing in Elena's vision. As plates were cleared, Marcus, the former L'Etoile guard, appeared, his face alight with purpose. Now a server here, he carried a tray of desserts, his presence a reminder of the courage he'd shown weeks ago. "Mrs. Lopez, Mr. Adams," he said, setting down a slice of tart. "This place, it's because of you I'm here." Crystal tilted her head, her voice gentle. "You chose this path, Marcus. We just gave you a nudge." He shook his head, gratitude in his eyes. "You showed me what standing up looks like, not just for you, but for everyone who's been pushed out." Bruce, ever understated, had quietly arranged to cover the evening's meals for all, a gesture Elena revealed. With a grateful nod, Crystal's heart swelled, not for the act itself, but for what it represented, a commitment to spaces that valued every soul. The room erupted in soft cheers as Elena shared the news, strangers toasting with glasses of water and wine alike. Crystal met Bruce's gaze, their shared values unspoken but palpable. This was their anniversary, not a display of wealth, but a celebration of love woven into community. As they stepped outside, the Chicago sky glittered above, stars mirroring the city's restless energy. Marcus followed, hesitating before speaking. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice steady, "what happened at L'Etoile wasn't right. You changed things, for me, for others." Crystal's smile was warm, her educator's heart seeing potential in his words. "It's about seeing people, Marcus. You're doing that here." Bruce extended a hand, his voice quiet but firm. "Keep building. You've got something real." They walked toward the Bentley, Crystal's hand in Bruce's, the weight of the past fading into the promise of now. A small sign caught her eye in a distant window where L'Etoile once stood. "Under new management, all are welcome." Crystal paused, her heart stirring. Change, she knew, began with moments like these, quiet, persistent, rooted in truth. "Happy anniversary," Bruce murmured, turning to face her, his eyes reflecting the stars. Crystal's smile deepened. 10 years, and you still show me what love can do. Their story, like this night, was a testament to resilience, a reminder that true worth shone brightest beyond appearances. Thank you for joining us in Crystal Lopez's powerful journey of dignity and redemption. Her story reminds us that true worth lies in character, not appearances. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced judgment or witnessed a moment of courage that sparked change? Share your experiences and where you're listening from in the comments below. Your voice strengthens our community. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and uplift. Until next time, thank you for being part of this journey. We can't wait to meet you again in our next tale of truth and humanity.